A very good morning to all of you, and I welcome you all to Ansar Kari. So, in this video, we'll be taking up the important news articles from the perspective of their importance and relevance for the UPSC Civil Services examination. So, let's start with the newspaper for 4th of April 2023. So, Surat Court, it grants bail to Rahul Gandhi and suspends the sentence. So, court will hear the application against the conviction in a defamation case, which was filed by a BJP MP on April 13. And the Congress leader says that he's fighting a battle to save the democracy and truth is his weapon. So, for us, what is important is all the important details regarding the defamation thing and also disqualification. So, when a person or when we say that when an individual who's an MP and he or she is convicted for 2 years or more, then they get disqualified and they no longer they are MPs, and they then after that, like after they're released, after the prison sentence, they complete that, then for next 6 years they are disqualified to be the MPs. So that is the thing. And then we have Article 102 and 103 of the Constitution. You can like find out about what does they exactly have to state regarding disqualification. We have 10th schedule in the Constitution, which was added by 52nd Constitutional Amendment Act in 1985, and that's there. So we also discussed about some of the important Supreme Court judgments, so you can just find them, or like we have discussed this in totality in the previous videos. So we'll be looking into that garbage dump, it turns into a mini forest. So how basically we are suffering from this problem of huge garbage dumps, which is, causing other threats for human life, for the biodiversity. So we'll be looking into this thing. And so talking about China and India's skirmishes. So China plans to rename 11 places in Arunachal. So in its attempt to lay claim to areas which are inside the Indian territory, the Chinese government, it has announced that it will standardize the names of 11 places in Arunachal Pradesh. So China का मानना ये है कि वो 11 places जो भी है, basically China is claiming them to be the Chinese territory. So AK dispute hai, then we also had the Doklam issue, and we know about the Eastern Ladakh issue, which is near the Pangong Tso Lake. So LAC ka like proper jo dispute hai, obviously that is around the border only. So net direct tax kitty is up by 17.6%. So we are talking about the direct tax. So India's net direct tax collection, it has risen 17.6% in 2022-23. So in the previous financial year, it has increased by 17.6%, which has exceeded the revised estimates. And the contribution of the corporate tax collections in the gross direct tax kitty, it was rupees 10 lakh crores, and there was just a tad higher than 9.6 lakh crores, which was paid by the taxpayers as a personal income tax and securities transaction tax. So direct tax के अंदर भी हमें पता होना चाहिए कि highest collections कहाँ से आ रहे हैं. Highest is from corporate tax, followed by income tax, and then securities transaction tax. एंड सिक्योरिटीज ट्रांजैक्शन टैक्स के बारे में भी आपको थोड़ा अगर पता होगा तो दैट वुड बी गुड, क्योंकि अभी रिसेंटली वी ऑल्सो डिस्कस्ड कि कुछ चेंजेस किए गए हैं. बेसिकली सिक्योरिटीज ट्रांजैक्शन टैक्स को इंक्रीज किया गया है, सो दैट जो मतलब जिन लोगों को ज्यादा अवेयरनेस नहीं होती है, जिन लोगों को ज्यादा नॉलेज भी नहीं होती है अबाउट द कैपिटल मार्केट, दे ऑल्सो ट्राई टू इन्वेस्ट देयर मनी एंड दे एंड अप लूजिंग इट. सो एक उस पर्सपेक्टिव से सिक्योरिटी ट्रांजैक्शन टैक्स को इंक्रीज किया गया है, ताकि जो ऑप्शंस ट्रेडिंग है, क्योंकि वो ज्यादा रिस्की होती है, तो उसमें लोग कम से कम आए. एंड एम इज की जो ज्यादा जिनको नॉलेज है, जो जिनको एक्सपीरियंस है, जिनको कॉन्फिडेंस है, वो ही लोग ट्रेड करें या इन्वेस्ट करें थ्रू ऑप्शंस. So as we saw that there was a garbage dump and that was recast into a lush mini forest. So garbage dump को आप कैसे एक mini forest के अंदर turn कर सकते हो? That is, you can say, a good alternative, या a good solution for a garbage dump problem. So it is there in 22-acre Christian College campus at Chenganur in Alappuzha district, and it is hard to imagine that this place it was once a stinking garbage dumping ground. So today it resembles a teeming forest ecosystem with trees, plants, small mammals, snakes, and chirping birds. So its transformation, which began almost a decade ago, so it has taken almost 10 years for like turning that garbage dump into a mini forest. And so that is one example or one alternative which can be cited in our answers. So that is the important takeaway for us from here. So coming to the editorial section now. So we are seeing that COVID-19 cases they are increasing. So it is important जब हम preparedness की बात करते हैं अगर कोई sudden increase हो जाता है but जो current variant है it is being said by the experts कि it is not like so much a cause of concern but cases are increasing so उसके लिए we need to have a proper plan. We need to have proper preparations in place. So that's there. And so it is basically here this article is talking about कि जो भी COVID-19 data we are having right now and we're recording and we are seeing कि COVID-19 cases are increasing. So it is just telling us how that data can be interpreted. So I don't think so that is important for us for the exam. And let's move forward. So time to put a price on the carbon emissions. So here it is talking about the carbon markets. So कैसे carbon markets function करती है उसकी एक simple एक basic clarity हो तो that would be great. So इसको हम पहले भी discuss कर चुके हैं and हमने देखा था कि कहाँ कहाँ कौन से parts of world में there are carbon markets which are functioning, which are there. So let's go through the important things in this article. So in the absence of a price for the use of the natural resources such as air and forest, environmental destruction, that has been part of every country's recipe for boosting the GDP growth. So the consequence of this approach, it has been the relentless emissions of the carbon causing a runaway climate change. And it's time, starting with the biggest economies of G20, to agree on the valuing nature and including by pricing the carbon affluence. And India can take the lead in this as we are the president of G20 this year in carbon pricing, which will open unexpected avenues of decarbonization. So, what are different ways of pricing the carbon emissions? So this article is giving us there are three ways of pricing the carbon. So that is the establishment of a carbon tax domestically. आप simply carbon tax impose कर सकते हो and जैसे कि this system is also followed in Korea and Singapore. Second is use of an emissions trading systems, which is working there in European Union and China. And thirdly is the application of an import tariff on the carbon content, which is there in European Union. So ये तीन डिफरेंट तरीके है कि डोमेस्टिकली या तो आप कार्बन टैक्स इम्पोज कर सकते हो जहाँ पे रेलेवेंट है. सेकेंडली इज जो कार्बन एमिशंस की जो बेसिकली ट्रेडिंग होती है जो हम कार्बन मार्केट्स के बारे में बात करते हैं. सेकेंड इज दैट एंड थर्ड इज एप्लीकेशन ऑफ इम्पोर्ट टैरिफ ऑन द कार्बन कंटेंट. सो एज पर द कार्बन कंटेंट जो भी चीज़ें आप इम्पोर्ट कर रहे हो अकॉर्डिंगली उसके ऊपर टैक्स इम्पोर्ट टैक्स इम्पोज करना would be the third way. So in तीनों का mix we can use. And there are around 46 countries which price carbon, although they cover only 30% of the global greenhouse gases emissions, and at an average price of around $6 a ton of carbon, that is the price, and a fraction of the estimated harm from the pollution. So that's how basically they are charging the carbon emissions. And even IMF, it has also proposed the price floors of around $75, $50, and $25 a ton of the carbon for the United States, China, and India, respectively. So there are also proposals by the IMF regarding this. And Through this, IMF का मानना ये है कि we'll be able to achieve 23% reduction in the carbon emissions globally by 2030. And economy-wide benefits of carbon pricing in terms of the damages avoided generally outweighed the cost it imposed on the individual industries in the European Union. सो जनरली हमने ये देखा है, जो इवन बाहर की कंट्रीज में ये तरीका फॉलो किया गया है, तो ये देखने को मिला है कि इसका कोई नुकसान नहीं है, क्योंकि अगर हम इकोनॉमी वाइड इकोनॉमिक पर्सपेक्टिव से भी इसके बेनिफिट्स देखें ऑफ कार्बन प्राइसिंग, इम्पोजिंग कार्बन टैक्स, सो इन टर्म्स ऑफ जो डैमेजेस एक तो हम अवॉइड कर पाए हैं थ्रू इम्पोजिंग दीज कार्बन टैक्सेस, प्लस गवर्नमेंट भी अपना रेवेन्यू इंक्रीज कर पाई है, सो फिजिकल डेफिसिट को भी कहीं ना कहीं रिड्यूस करने में हेल्प करेगा। तो हमने ये देखा जो कॉस्ट थी टू द इंडस्ट्रियलिस्ट, टू द इंडिविजुअल इंडस्ट्रीज, जो उनकी कॉस्ट इंक्रीज होगी बिकॉज ऑफ दीज कार्बन टैक्सेस, वो कॉस्ट इट हैज बेसिकली हमने देखा जो बेनिफिट्स देखे, यहाँ पे हम कॉस्ट बेनिफिट एनालिसिस की बात करें तो बेनिफिट्स हमें ज्यादा देखने को मिले हैं फ्रॉम द रियल लाइफ एक्सपीरियंसेस विच वी हैव सीन इन अदर कंट्रीज लाइक यूरोपियन यूनियन में देखा, ब्रिटिश कोलंबिया, कनाडा एंड स्वीडन। सो बेसिकली कार्बन टैक्स इम्पोज करने में कोई नुकसान नहीं है। सो इट्स इम्पैक्ट ऑन इंडिया की अगर हम बात करें, सो अमंग द 3 वेज ऑफ प्राइसिंग जो अभी हमने देखा, डिस्कस किया, इंडिया कुड फाइंड अ कार्बन टैक्स अपीलिंग एज इट कैन डायरेक्टली डिस्करेज द फॉसिल फ्यूल्स while raising the revenues which can be further invested in the cleaner sources of energy, जो हमें एनर्जी ट्रांजिशन में हेल्प करेगा। सो अगर हम इंडिया की बात करें तो इंडिया के पर्सपेक्टिव से जो कंडीशंस है, जो हमारी स्टेट ऑफ इकोनॉमी है, वी आर अ डेवलपिंग कंट्री, सो इंडिया फाइंड्स द बेस्ट थिंग इज कार्बन टैक्स एज द मोस्ट अपीलिंग थिंग, एज हम उसके थ्रू डायरेक्टली फॉसिल फ्यूल्स का हायर अमाउंट ऑफ यूसेज या एक्सप्लॉयटेशन ऑफ द फॉसिल फ्यूल्स को डायरेक्टली डिस्करेज कर पाएंगे। एंड जैसे कि अभी मैंने बोला कि कार्बन टैक्स के थ्रू गवर्नमेंट के रेवेन्यू भी गवर्नमेंट रेवेन्यू भी जनरेट कर पाएगी। सो उस रेवेन्यू को हम आगे क्लीनर सोर्सेज ऑफ एनर्जी में, ग्रीन प्रोजेक्ट्स में इन्वेस्ट कर सकते हैं। सो एक ये है, सो इट कुड रिप्लेस द मोर इनएफिशिएंट स्कीम ऑफ पेट्रोलियम टैक्सेस व्हिच आर नॉट डायरेक्टली एम्ड एट एमिशंस। सो जो पेट्रोलियम टैक्सेस अभी इम्पोज किए जाते हैं उसको कार्बन टैक्स कैन रिप्लेस। एंड अगर हम सऊदी अरेबिया एंड रशिया में देखें, सो दे आर एट द लो एंड ऑफ द गैसोलीन प्राइसेस, and China and India are in the mid range, and then Germany and France, they are at the high end. So this is the thing. So carbon sorry, जो पेट्रोलियम टैक्स आप रिमूव कर दोगे, सो उससे भी पेट्रोलियम के जो प्राइसेस है वो भी कम हो पाएंगे। And in most countries, including India, the fiscal policy है that is set in place the basic structures that are needed to implement a carbon tax. So India की जो even fiscal policy भी है उसमें carbon tax is also a component of it. And for example, अगर हम example ले, so they can be woven into road fuel taxes which are established in most places. So road fuel taxes impose किए जा सकते हैं and extended to the industry and agriculture also. So policy makers, they have to choose the tax rate, कौन सा टैक्स, क्या टैक्स रेट आप इम्पोज करोगे, पॉलिसी मेकर्स के लिए वो टास्क है which varies widely from, अगर हम कंट्री वाइज देखें तो देयर इज ह्यूज वेरिएशन। जापान की अगर हम बात करें तो दे इम्पोज अराउंड $2.65 a ton of carbon dioxide, and डेनमार्क की बात करें तो दे आर इम्पोजिंग $165 a ton set for 2030. So basically इंटरनेशनली हम ऐसा कुछ नहीं ले सकते कि क्या कार्बन टैक्स होना चाहिए, उसका हमारा एक प्रोसीजर, एक प्रोसेस होना चाहिए ऑफ असेसमेंट कि गिवन द डोमेस्टिक फैक्टर्स एंड ऑल्सो इंटरनेशनली भी अगर हम कॉन्ट्रीब्यूशंस की बात करें इन ग्रीन हाउस गैसेस, सो ऐसे कुछ फैक्टर्स लेके वी कैन डिसाइड, वी कैन कम टू वन टैक्स रेट विच कैन बी इम्पोज्ड। सो इंडिया कुड स्टार्ट विद द IMF फिगर, अगर हमें बेसिकली स्टार्टिंग में इट इज गेटिंग लिटिल डिफिकल्ट टू डिसाइड कि क्या टैक्स रेट होना चाहिए, जो रिसेंटली अभी IMF ने इम्पोज किया है फिगर ऑफ $25 a ton, so we can start with that initially. So main obstacle is कि basically argument by the industrial firms about losing their competitive advantage to the exporters from countries with a lower carbon price. So जो industries है, जो firms का major problem या major challenge की वो बात कर रहे हैं, वो ये कह रहे हैं कि अगर a higher amount of carbon tax इंडिया में impose किया जाएगा compared to other countries, so जो competitive advantage ये firms enjoy करती है in terms of exports, so उसको नुकसान होगा, क्योंकि जो बाहर की कंट्रीज है जहाँ पे इंडिया से कम कार्बन प्राइस होने वाला है, वहां पे जो हमारा कॉम्पिटिटिव एडवांटेज है, वी कैन लूज ऑन दैट, एंड उसकी वजह से हमारे हमारे एक्सपोर्ट्स पे भी डेफिनेटली इफेक्ट होगा. सो ये एक कंसर्न है ऑफ द इंडस्ट्रियल फर्म्स. And it might also make sense to allow the companies to use high quality international carbon markets, carbon credits, to offset up to a certain percentage of their taxable emissions also. So अगर basically हमें पता है कि carbon markets, जो carbon certificates होते हैं, जो carbon trading होती है, उसमें how industries they can take a benefit of that, अगर उनको लगता है कि उनकी cost increase हो जाएगी through the carbon taxes, so they can take the advantage here in the carbon markets, where if they meet the target, so they can trade that certificate and then they can earn the amount respectively as per their achievement. And communication, that is important. So all said, any type of carbon prices, it faces the stiff political opposition. So अगर हम politically ये चीज को देखें तो definitely political parties, they have to face a lot of opposition when it comes to carbon pricing or imposition of carbon taxes. So when a new conservative government took office, Australia, it repealed the 2012 tax just 2 years after it was instituted. So ऐसे instances भी देखे गई है कि governments ने carbon taxes को completely हटा ही दिया है, and that is there. So communicating the idea of wins at the societal level, even in the presence of some individual producers losers, that is vital. So अगर हम बेसिकली अगर ये ऑपोजिशन को हम कम करने की बात करें तो एक तरीका ये है कि कम्युनिकेटिंग एट द सोसाइटल लेवल, सिविल सोसाइटी में अवेयरनेस जनरेट करना कि इम्पोजिशन ऑफ सच टाइप्स ऑफ टैक्सेस, हाउ दे वुड बी हेल्पिंग अस, उसके क्या बेनिफिट्स हो सकते हैं अगर वी वर्क ऑन दिस थिंग. तो ये कहीं ना कहीं डेफिनेटली ऑपोजिशन को, जो प्रोटेस्ट है उसको कम करने में डेफिनेटली हेल्प करेगा. बट ऑब्वियसली ऐसा तो नहीं होता कि अगर आप कोई चेंजेस कर रहे हो या फिर अगर हम यहाँ पे कार्बन टैक्स इम्पोजिशन की बात कर रहे हैं तो सबको ही फायदा होगा. कुछ लूजर्स भी होंगे, बट डेफिनेटली वी नीड टू लाइक rise above that and see कि broader level पे how imposition of carbon taxes would be helping us economically, environmentally, socially, and likewise. So a high enough carbon tax across China, US, India, Russia, and Japan alone with complementary actions could have a notable effect on the global affluence and the warming. So अगर हम specifically बस इन्हीं economies की बात करें, talking about the five economies of China, US, India, Russia, and Japan. So अगर सिर्फ यहीं पे we are seeing proper effective implementation of the carbon taxes, so more than 60% of the global affluence hai, they can be reduced, they can be controlled. So that's how important it is, and that's there. So India right now, we are the president of G20 summit, and we can play a lead role by tabling this global carbon pricing in the existential fight against the climate change. So this is an existential fight against the climate change. So these were all the important details that we had to understand and that were very important for us to know also. So moving forward, so why should India cut down its salt intake? Basically, obviously from the perspective of health, excessive intake and consumption of salt is not a good healthy option for us. So I guess it is focusing upon this thing only. So we had the Food Safety and Standards Authority of India, it implemented the Eat Right India movement, which strives to transform the nation's food system to ensure secure, healthy, and sustainable nutrition for all the citizens. So, in line with this goal, in line with this movement, जब हम Eat Right India movement की बात करते हैं, तो there's also a social media campaign against Aaj Se Thoda Kam. So this is the name of the campaign. And however, the average Indian sodium intake remains alarmingly high. So India में sodium intake जब हम salt intake की बात करते हैं, तो that is alarmingly very very high. So that is why it is very important to consider this thing and focus on it. जब भी you're like having something. So evidence it shows an average daily consumption of approximately 11 grams of salt. So India, we need a comprehensive national strategy to curb the salt consumption, as the current measures they have fallen short. So we are not seeing कि जो movements या जो पहले steps लिए गए उनसे ऐसे कोई हमें important results देखने को नहीं मिले, and still the salt intake it is very high. So a multi-pronged approach hona would be helping us, which would include engaging the consumers, the industry, and the government. So that is crucial at the moment. So collaboration between state and union government, that can also help us in combating hypertension, which is often caused by the excessive sodium intake. So hypertension, diabetes, and taking like stress, high blood pressure. So all of that is because of the high salt intake. So an average Indian's sodium consumption, that is more than double the physiological need, and dramatically it exceeds the WHO's recommended daily intake. So it is more than double जो भी Indians we are consuming salt. Given that we are like precautious, we are knowing कि कितना daily intake of sodium salt होना चाहिए. But right now, अगर हम major level, pan India level की बात करें, so that is double the standards जो WHO ने recommend किए हैं. So WHO it recommended daily intake of less than 5 gram of salt for an adult, and India में it is around 11 gram, which is more than double. So the demand for Scottish independence, like examination perspective से इतना important नहीं है, but as an awareness, हमें पता होना चाहिए कि क्या different countries में what are the reasons of protest, चाहे हम फ्रांस की बात करें, इजराइल की बात करें. So here we're talking about the Scottish independence. So we'll just go through the gist. So we saw that the British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak rejected a call from the new First Minister of Scotland and the leader of the governing Scottish National Party to hold a second referendum for the Scotland's independence from the UK. So this is the main demand. Scotland, it is demanding for its independence from UK, and in the 1970s, after the oil it was discovered in North Sea, so there was a popular campaign in line with the central ideology of this SNP party for the independence. So with the iconic slogan that it's Scotland's oil, the party argued that if not for the Britain's control over the reserved matters, proceeds from the oil, they would have benefited the Scottish economy. So after the discovery of oil in North Sea, उसके बाद से demand और ज़्यादा fast हो गई है, and a formal national referendum for independence in Scotland, it was held in 2014 में हुआ था एक referendum in Scotland, but which saw an 85% turnout. So however, amid the concerns over how an independent Scotland it would actually function without the British assistance, pro-independence voters they lost to those who voted to stay. So एक concern ये भी था कि अगर Scotland becomes independent of Britain, so actually completely वो कैसे function कर पाएगा, तो ये कुछ concerns भी थे. So that's why that referendum was not successful. So on defamation law, is a blow against freedom of speech and expression. So let's understand the nitty-gritties of this article. So the Supreme Court, it has always had an ambivalent relationship with the freedom of speech and expression, treating free speech more as an annoyance than a right. And its defamation law judgment continues that long, unfortunate history. So we saw that the former Congress President Rahul Gandhi was recently sentenced to 2 years of prison over a 2019 defamation case. So जो case था, that was related to defamation, and because of which the things about disqualification also became important. So we'll understand the all the important details here. So in this article, basically, the author of this article explains that the colonial history of the criminal liberal law and how it stands as an impediment to the freedom of speech is the main thing that this article is talking about. So, the dawn of the 17th century, Englishmen were in the habit of challenging each other to violent duels in order to avenge the personal insults. So, public disorder, it was frequent, and the authorities, they decided to step in. So, to obviate the need for the duels, they began to prosecute defamation as a criminal offense. So defamation, it is a criminal offense. Back then, हम यहाँ पे colonial history की बात कर रहे हैं. So was born the notorious criminal libel, and truth was no defense, since a true defamatory statement was as likely to lead to a breach of peace as a false one. So 250 years later, in 1860, British, they imported their idea of criminal libel into the newly minted IPC. Section 499 of the IPC, it criminalized the intentionally defamatory statements. So it is intentionally defamatory statements, they were held as criminal offense, and it was made a part of IPC section 499. So true statements, they were not exempted unless they also happen to be made for the public good. So agar two statements की बात करें, truth की बात करें, and then you're saying कि it was defamatory, so वहाँ पे कुछ exemption था, unless we see कि जो स्टेटमेंट्स बोले गए, जो स्टेटमेंट्स पब्लिक किए गए, या जो भी बोला गया, दैट वाज फॉर द पब्लिक गुड. सो अगर वो पब्लिक गुड में होगा तो यू कांट कंसिडर इट टू बी डेफेमेशन. सो वर्ल्ड हैज डेफिनेटली मूव्ड ऑन. यहाँ हम 1860 की बात कर रहे हैं, आईपीसी विच हैड ऑब्वियसली, हम डीकोलोनाइजेशन की भी बात करते हैं. सो वर्ल्ड हैज डेफिनेटली मूव्ड ऑन, एंड but we see that none of this thing has seemed to matter to the Supreme Court of India. So dismissing a petition which was filed by Subramaniam Swanami challenging the constitutionality of section 499 of the IPC. So there was also a petition filed which challenged constitutionality of this section 499 of IPC, which is defamation. It was basically, the court has kept 1860 provision with its 17th century roots entirely intact. So Supreme Court ने इसको reject कर दिया है. This petition has been rejected and कोई भी changes नहीं किए गए हैं. So in order to keep such an onerous offense on the statute books, the court had to construct novel arguments which will have serious and unfortunate implications for the freedom of speech and expression in the coming years. So using reputation as the right. So first, that it held that the right to reputation, it was protected under Article 21 of the Constitution, which guarantees life and personal liberty, a dignified life. And now Article 21, it only protects the individual's life and liberty against the interference by the state. So notwithstanding this minor textual hurdle, Supreme Court declared that the right to free speech under Article 19, Clause 1, Subclause A had to be balanced against the right to reputation under Article 21. So Supreme Court का कहना ये है कि अगर like defamation वाला जो section है, if even if it is like completely repealed, if it is completely removed, so there is also right to reputation, which is we can say a derived fundamental right under Article 21 of the Indian Constitution. So it says that it is important to balance the right to reputation, jo Article 21 guarantees to us, and also has to be balanced with the freedom of free speech and expression that is given by, guaranteed by Article 19 of the fundamental rights. So the court, it never explained कि ये balancing exercise होने कैसे वाली है, आप कैसे इसको बैलेंस करोगे. बट इट सिंपली इट हैज जस्ट asserted that since reputation it could not be crucified at the altar of free speech, criminal defamation, it was constitutional. So this was the whole thing, an explanation and the reasoning given by the Supreme Court. So it said कि बेसिकली ये तो नहीं बात हुई कि आप इसको बैलेंस कैसे करोगे इन दो चीजों को, राइट टू रेपुटेशन एंड फ्रीडम ऑफ स्पीच एंड एक्सप्रेशन को. बट सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने सिंपली ये जरूर असर्ट किया कि सिंस रेपुटेशन इट कुड नॉट बी क्रूसिफाइड एट द ऑल्टर ऑफ फ्री स्पीच, कि फ्री स्पीच के नाम पे आप कुछ भी बोलोगे, यू कैन डिफेम एनीबडी. So that's why it said कि criminal defamation, it is constitutional and you can't say that it is ultra vires the constitution or it is unconstitutional. So the two moves that this court has made, that is first to elevate the reputation to the level of the fundamental right. This is under Article 21. And secondly, to have it prevail over the free speech have no basis in either the text or the structure of the Constitution. So clearly it is not mentioned in the Constitution. Firstly, right to reputation, and secondly, the right to reputation is supreme or it is above the right to freedom of free speech and expression. So ये दो key takeaways है जो हमारे लिए बहुत important है, and it is important to keep them in mind. So there are also dangerous moves by the Supreme Court, and over the last 30 years, along with its PIL jurisdiction, the court has radically expanded the scope of right to life and personal liberty under Article 21. So there are a number of derived fundamental rights when we talk about Article 21 or even Article 19 to that matter. So Article 21, it has been held to include the right to sleep, the right to pollution-free environment, among other things. So जो बाकी derived fundamental rights are from Article 21. So other examples include right to sleep. Second example is the right to pollution-free environment. So that is a part of your right to dignified life and personal liberty. And for the most part, the court, it has also used this expanded definition to force the state to undertake various social justice and welfare measures for the benefit of the citizens. So ऐसे बहुत सारे instances हुए हैं पहले भी, and the court did something else right in this case. So instead of using Article 21 as a shield to protect the individual against the state persecution or indifference, it used it as a sword to cut down the fundamental right to freedom of speech and expression this time. So there have been hints of this before in the court's jurisprudence, but this time, this new doctrine of death by Article 21, it emerged as a serious threat to the future of the constitutional rights. So Article 21, it has now become so vast that if its use as a sword becomes a regular feature, then it will likely soon swallow up the rest of the fundamental rights chapter. So even basically, ये पढ़ के हमें ये समझ में आ रहा है कि even within the fundamental rights, कुछ फंडामेंटल राइट्स हैं जो बाकी फंडामेंटल राइट्स से ऊपर रखी जा रही है, जो उनसे ज्यादा इंपॉर्टेंट है. सो यहाँ पे बेसिकली वी आर सीइंग कि आर्टिकल 21 आज के टाइम में इतना ब्रॉड हो गया है कि उससे इतनी सारी डिराइव्ड फंडामेंटल राइट्स हमारे पास आज है, which Article 21 guarantees us because of several Supreme Court judgments and जो भी instances, जो भी cases हुए पहले, कि आर्टिकल 21 इतना ब्रॉड हो गया है कि अगर Supreme Court is going to use this one particular article in saying कि Article 21 supreme है and बाकी fundamental rights उससे नीचे हैं, so एक ये imbalance हो जाएगा even within the fundamental rights chapter or part of the Constitution of India. So इस केस में भी यही हुआ है कि right to reputation which is there, which is guaranteed or which is derived from the Article 21 of the Constitution, that is supreme over your fundamental right to free speech and expression, जो कि Article 19 हमें guarantee करता है. So एक ये concern है जो ये article हमें बताने की कोशिश कर रहा है. So court की second argument was to invoke something that it called the constitutional fraternity. So second argument, it was related to this thing, constitutional fraternity. So it held that criminal defamation law protected the feeling of fraternity or solidarity between the members of a society. So it also protected this thing, ये Supreme Court का कहना है. And while this may sound fair enough, there's a slight problems. and that is that constitutional fraternity, it is not a part of Article 19, Clause 2 of the Constitution, which specifically limits the circumstances under which the state can restrict the speech to 8 enumerated categories. So obviously we know that there are some reasonable restrictions which this Article Clause 2 talks about, but Supreme Court said कि जब हम constitutional fraternity की बात करते हैं, so it is not a part of Article 19, Clause 2 of the Constitution. It is also nowhere in the fundamental rights chapter also. So the question of balancing this free speech against the constitutional fraternity, it does not arise. So the word fraternity, it is mentioned in the Constitution's preamble as an aspirational goal for the duly independent Indian Republic alongside the liberty and equality, the three great slogans that originated with the French Revolution. So बहुत सारे important facts सिर्फ इसी portion पे हमने cover कर लिया है that अगर हम कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल फ्रेटर्निटी की बात करें तो उसका कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन में कहीं भी मेंशन नहीं है, या हम खाली अगर फंडामेंटल राइट्स की बात करें, प्रेएम्बल की बात करें, तो कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल फ्रेटर्निटी कहीं पे भी मेंशन नहीं है, बट यस डेफिनेटली फ्रेटर्निटी वर्ड इट इज देयर इन द प्रेएम्बल, एंड फ्रेटर्निटी, लिबर्टी, इक्वालिटी, दीज आर थ्री स्लोगन्स जो हमें फ्रेंच रेवोल्यूशन से लिए. So that is also important, and it was always meant to be that an abstract concept and a rallying cry signifying a dream and an utopia. So it was never meant to become a tool to broaden the scope of restrictions upon the fundamental rights. So these were some of the arguments, explanations, a part of the verdict of the Supreme Court regarding the defamation thing. So definitely it was very important for us to understand the important chronology and kya detail mein Supreme Court had given the explanations in its verdict regarding this thing. So only government can take a call on plea on the disqualified lawmakers. This has been said by Election Commission of India to the Supreme Court कि only government, union government can take a call जब भी कोई plea होती है regarding disqualified lawmakers. So the power is in the hands of the government. So the poll body, it maintains distance on this question whether disqualified lawmakers should be banned from contesting elections for 5 years or not. So एक ये और साथ में चीज चल रही है. So the Election Commission in the Supreme Court, it has chosen to maintain a distance on this question whether a disqualified lawmaker should be banned from contesting the elections for the 5 years or not. So the commission said that it would be appropriate to have the union government deal with this issue. And so the petitioner contended that an MP or an MLA who has either been disqualified from the House under the 10th schedule, which is about the anti-defection law, or under Article 19, Clause 1, Subclause E of the Constitution, that should be barred from contesting elections for 5 years. So this is what the petition is saying. So Article 19, it is Article 191. Not 19. So Article 191, Clause 1 and Subclause E, it gives the various grounds of disqualification for being chosen as or for being a member of the Legislative Assembly or the Legislative Council of a state. So the different grounds of disqualification, they are being mentioned or it is being talked about in the Article 191 of the Constitution. So that includes holding an office of profit, being of unsound mind or undischarged solvent, or being a non-citizen or voluntarily acquiring the citizenship of foreign state, or being under any acknowledgement of allegiance or adherence of a foreign state. So ये different grounds हैं जिसके under a person, MP, MLA or MLC can be disqualified. So these are in Article 191. So ये important हो जाता है हमारे लिए. And the final ground of disqualification, and the one highlighted by Ms. Thakur in this petition जिसकी हम बात कर रहे हैं, it is if an MLA or an MLC is disqualified by or under any law which is made by the parliament also. So that is also possible. So the issue involved in this matter, it pertains to the interpretation of Article 191, and it relates to the matter that do that do not have a nexus with the conduct of the elections in terms of the remit of the commission under Article 324. So therefore, respondent number 1 is the appropriate party for the adjudication of the prayers made in the petition, and election commission it is vested with the authority of superintendence, direction, and control of the elections for the conduct of the elections to the parliament, to the state legislatures, and the offices of president and vice president. So इलेक्शन कमीशन ऑफ इंडिया की ड्यूटी की बात करें, फंक्शंस की बात करें, रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी की बात करें, so it is limited to superintendence, direction, and control of the elections to these different bodies that I just mentioned in this article. And उससे ज़्यादा it does not enjoy the powers. So even the election commissioners has said कि it should be the government जिसको इस चीज के बारे में बात करनी चाहिए, not the election commission. So in this petition, the petitioner has basically highlighted the instances in the past जहाँ पे lawmakers they resigned from the legislatures, their legislative parties, which brought them to the house, leading to a fall of the government. So पहले भी ऐसे instances हमें देखने को मिले हैं. So you can find out more about PM Swanidhi scheme. ये बहुत ज़्यादा मतलब हमने न्यूज़पेपर में रहती है, तो I hope कि सबको पता ही होगा कि it is basically जो street vendors हैं उनको working capital provide करती है to the tune of ₹10,000, and this is the main aim or objective of this scheme. So it is there under the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. This is also important for us to remember. ये prelims में आ सकता है in the form of question. So अगर हम minority communities का share देखें, जितने भी working capital loans provide किए गए under the PM Swanidhi scheme, so that is very less. So that is being highlighted through this article. So India and US की जो air exercise है, that is going to begin next week, and Japan is going to be an observer. So they're continuing the military to military engagement. The Air Force of India and US, they are set to conduct COPE India exercise. So the name is COPE India exercise. It is between India and USA's Air Force, and it would be happening at the Kalai Kunda Air Base in West Bengal. And Japan is going to be an observer. So the exercise, it will see intense air maneuvers aimed at improving the interoperability, and it is so that's going to be there. So हमारे लिए यहाँ पे name is important. So amid disruptions, Rajya Sabha it has passed the competition bill, and there was no debate regarding this bill. So that is concerned कि without debate bills they are being passed, because obviously we are seeing कि disruptions कितनी ज़्यादा हो रही है. It is becoming so difficult for the parliament to function. So Lok Sabha it had passed this bill before, and this basically this competition bill it regulates the mergers and the acquisitions, and this was passed by Rajya Sabha. So center it flagged for the delay in survey to assess poverty. So Union Minister of State for Planning said that the last time the center it made an estimate of the poverty line and the poverty ratio, it was in 2013, and उसके बाद ऐसा कुछ exercise हुई नहीं है to estimate कि क्या poverty line होनी चाहिए, क्या poverty ratio है. So 2013 के बाद it's been almost a decade कि ऐसा कुछ survey exercise नहीं की गई है. And that was 2013 it was based on the large sample surveys on the household consumer expenditure, which was carried out by the National Sample Survey Office in 2011-12. So इस चीज की क्लैरिटी होना, पता होना इज इम्पोर्टेंट कि इंडिया में जो हम पॉवर्टी लाइन असेस करते हैं या एस्टिमेट करते हैं, it is based on the households consumer expenditure survey. So ये important point है. And this is very clear it is carried out by NSSO. एंड 2013 का जो सर्वे किया गया था, अगर अब उसके डेटा की बात करें, सो एज पर इट द नंबर ऑफ पुअर पीपल इन द कंट्री इट वाज रिकॉर्डेड एट 27 करोड़ इन 2011-12. सो उसके बाद हमने देखा कि पॉवर्टी लेवल्स कम हुए हैं, बट ड्यू टू कोविड-19 अगेन इट हैज जंप्ड बैक. So prices of 651 essential drugs, they are down by 6.7% from April 1. And we have the National Pharmaceutical Pricing Authority, which decides the prices of the drugs. And apart from that, जब हम बात करते हैं कि जो भी medicines हैं, which are a part of this essential drugs list, या essential medicines list, उसमें government के पास power होती है to make changes in its market prices. And National Pharmaceutical Pricing Authority, it has been able to fix the ceiling prices of 650 medicines so far out of the 870 scheduled drugs which are listed under the national list of essential medicines. So जो प्राइसेस थे इन ड्रग्स के which are a part of this list, उनको उनके ऊपर एक सीलिंग लगा दी गई है कि इस प्राइस के ऊपर the prices cannot go beyond that particular ceiling or the upper limit. So उसके वजह से because of this step the government or the central government has been able to control or cap the prices of certain essential medicines. So that's there. And so coming to the world page, so NASA names first woman, first Black astronauts for the lunar mission. And so they have named the astronauts will be going into space. So Finland, it is preparing to enter NATO. So it's going to be the latest entrant, and the center-right National Coalition, it emerged as the single largest party with 20% of the vote, and the populist Finns, they won 20.1%, while the Prime Minister Marin Social Democrats, they secured only 19.9% of the votes. So the country, it prepares to make its historic entry into NATO. So that's going to be there. And so NATO membership will require Finland to raise its defense spending. And basically Finland, it is now going to join NATO after Turkey has ratified its membership and lifting the last hurdle to membership for the Nordic nation that shares a long border with Russia. So with this thing coming up, it is important for us to know which all countries they share the land border with Russia, and Finland is definitely one of them, and which is going to be a member country of NATO. So that's the latest development, and obviously we are seeing that such because of the Russia-Ukraine war, such things they are happening. We are seeing that the global geoeconomic, geopolitical order that is again reshaping and rebuilding, or it is being restructured in a way. So Philippines, it has allotted 4 more military bases to US troops. So Philippines, it is announced that the location of the 4 additional military bases to be used by the US troops, with one site which is near the South China Sea and another is not far from Taiwan. So these are some of the developments. So it is important to maintain an eye what are the developments regarding even this region, South China Sea, East China Sea, in the Taiwan region. So that's there. And apart from that, so Chinese spy balloon, it has gathered intelligence on the US military sites, and so it was able to make multiple passes over some of the sites in February. At times it was flying in a figure 8 formation, and the intelligence China collected was mostly from the electronic signals which can be picked up from the weapons systems, or it including the communications from the base patrol rather than the images. So that's there. So the manufacturing sector's PMI, it rose to 3-month high in March. So PMI is the Purchasing Managers Index. So for the manufacturing sector, it's a good news. And S&P Global Survey shows that manufacturing firms' new orders and output advanced even as the input cost inflation slid to the second lowest in the 2.5 years. And PMI, it rose to 56.4 level in February. So core comfort, basically we're seeing that new export orders, they picked up pace sequentially, but that remains slight and historically subdued. But because we are seeing कि जो export के orders are, they have increased, so that can be one of the reasons of increase in PMI for manufacturing. And outstanding business volumes, however, they grew at the weakest in a year. And fresh hiring की बात करें, so that is not seeing so like so clearly, so इतना ज़्यादा fresh hiring exercises अभी नहीं हो रही है. And overall positive sentiment slid to an 8-month low on the concerns about the general inflation. So जनरल इन्फ्लेशन अभी बहुत ज़्यादा हाई चल रही है, या ये बोल सकते हैं कि हम उसको अभी कंटेन करने में सक्सेसफुल नहीं हुए हैं. सो वो एक कंसर्न चली आ रही है. एंड जब तक इन्फ्लेशन कम नहीं हो जाएगी तो वी आर नॉट गोइंग टू सी इवन दी टाइट मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी बीइंग रिलैक्स्ड. एंड जो ओवरऑल पॉजिटिव सेंटिमेंट है वो डेफिनेटली हाई इन्फ्लेशन की वजह से या स्टिकी इन्फ्लेशन की वजह से वी कैन से इट इज नॉट दैट पॉजिटिव. सो ये कुछ ऑब्जर्वेशंस थी. So जो antitrust law था, it gets more teeth. Mergers, they are going to win swifter clearances. So Parliament, it cleared the Competition Amendment Bill 2023, which paved the way for the government to enact some significant changes to the country's antitrust regime, including the swifter clearances for the mergers and acquisitions. So though this law, it also mandates जो firms that they'll be penalized by the Competition Commission of India, they must fork out at least 25% of the penalties levied on them for their appeals to be heard by an appellate tribunal. So this is one thing. And the definition of the turnover, it has also been enlarged to mean that the global turnover from all the products and services of a contravening enterprises. So global turnover की बात हो रही है यहाँ पे from all the products and services जिसमें एक particular business and firm is involved. So turnover की definition थोड़ी expand की गई है. It has been made much more broader. And your assessment time here, that has been cut to 150 days. Earlier, it was 210 days from the date of filing of the notice by the parties. And the Competition Commission of India, it will have to frame a prima facie opinion within 30 days from the receipt of such notice. So oil, it surges as yesterday only we saw कि OPEC Plus they have taken, in a surprise decision, they had taken a decision to cut the crude oil production and output. So कल share markets में we saw कि जो crude oil का price था, it has spiked up again. So that was obviously a direct consequence of that decision by OPEC Plus. So let's move to Mint now. So who is going to finance the mega cities of the future? So we're talking about the recently held G20's infrastructure working group. It was held there in Visakhapatnam. So its meeting ka focus was on urban infrastructure financing. And let's see कि क्या options discuss किए गए. So मेजरली सबसे पहले तो ये देखना इम्पोर्टेंट है कि क्यों हम इस पे फाइनेंसिंग ऑफ सिटीज पे why we are focusing upon it. So as per the UN SDG goals report 2022, it states कि by 2050 7 out of 10 people they are likely to be living in the urban area. So urbanization definitely आने वाले टाइम में और increase होने वाला है. So India's story, it is obviously no different from this. And by 2047 half of the country's population, it will be living in the urban areas. So abhi majority of the population in India, it is found in rural India. But by 2047, when we complete 100 years of independence, more than half of our population would be there in the urban areas. It will shift to urban areas. So cities, they need to be better planned. It is important they are they have better planned. जब हम development की भी बात करते हैं urban areas में, तो it needs to be like as per a scientific plan, and the infrastructure needs to be focused on spatial, social, and economic inclusion. So spatial and social inclusion, it would mean providing affordable necessities like housing and water. So this is what we mean by spatial and social inclusion. And economic inclusion की बात करें तो it would be including jobs, and Indian cities, they will need capital investment to the tune of around $840 billion by 2036 in terms of infrastructure and municipal services as per a World Bank report. So that's why this question of who is going to finance and how it would be financed when it comes to the megacities development in the coming times. So what are the different avenues of financing for the cities? So India ki jo cities hai, they occupy just 3% of the nation's land, but they contribute over 60% to the GDP. So you can see ki land share की अगर हम बात करें, so that is very less, but contribution to GDP is comparatively very higher. So while we seeing growing urbanization here, revenue from tax and non-tax sources here, grants from central and state governments, and they are proving to be insufficient because demand is outgrowing, and public-private partnerships हैं, there are issuance of municipal bonds जिसके through we are trying to raise more funds. There are green bonds by the urban local bodies जो issue की जा रही है, and apart from that, the land value capture in terms of the additional floor space index. So these are different alternatives to which we are depending upon, we are shifting and we are expanding, ताकि जो हमारी financing है that remains adequate and there's no shortfall at that front. So जो local bodies है, they could also look at recovering the user charges for the sanitation, water, etc. And if that is successful, this would help improve their credit worthiness. So central government ने क्या steps लिए हैं when it comes to financing the cities? So union budget में the government has proposed a urban infrastructure development fund of rupees 10,000 crores per year for the public agencies to create the infrastructure in tier 2 and tier 3 cities. And बाकी different measures है, that includes safe and dignified sanitation, state-led investment for the urban development, and incentivizing cities to increase their credit worthiness for the municipal bonds. So municipal bonds के ऊपर हमारी reliance definitely और ज़्यादा increase हो रही है. So understanding more about it, key what is happening at this front. So municipal bond market, it has been an untapped source of financing, which the urban local bodies, they are trying to build upon. So as I said, key we are trying to, when it comes to even awareness about that, how the municipal bonds, they can be used in terms of raising the finances, and also how people can invest them in terms of being a safer option, safer investment option for them. So इस चीज पे काफी फोकस किया जा रहा है. So there are around 28 municipal bonds जो कि listed है on NSE, जो कि issue की जाती है by 10 cities, and which includes Pune, Hyderabad, Indore, Amravati, Bhopal, Visakhapatnam, Ahmedabad. So these are cities जहाँ पे municipal bonds they are being issued. So as per the reports, government, it has identified around 30 cities जहाँ पे with good ratings, in which there is a good municipal bond market in around 30 cities in India. So the Indore Municipal Corporation this year, it became the first city to issue green bonds on the NSE. So not just municipal bonds, they are going one step further in issuing the green bonds. So that was the first one was the Indore Municipal Corporation to issue such a green bond. And और क्या किया जा सकता है? So the commercial debt financing, including loans and bonds, that is one option. And any bond purchase is done with 3 aspects in mind. So 3 aspects हमारे mind में रहते हैं जब भी we are going ahead with purchasing a bond. So first is obviously क्या return मिलने वाला है on your investment, and whether the bond, it has sovereign backing or not, कि government की, whether it is backed by government or not, because that is very important जब हम risk reduction की बात करते हैं. Thirdly, if there is a tax incentive, कोई ऐसा tax incentive है, so that we can save on tax. So a sovereign backing gives the confidence to the investors, and government definitely can provide that guarantee. So making them tax free, it couldn't hurt the tax benefits for the interest income, the capital gains, for instance. So these were all the important things that it was important for us to know. And now coming to why revisions in India's GDP numbers, why it is important and why does it matter? So final GDP figure changes from its initial estimates. This is provided here in this graph. So you can see कि कितने number of times the estimates they are revised. So there is first advance estimate, then second advance estimates, provisional estimates, first revised estimates, second revised estimates, and then we have the third revised estimates. So there are a number of 6 times the estimates they are being revised. And you can see 2016-17 में है, we're talking about the GDP growth at constant prices by revision stage as given in percentage form. So at constant prices की जब हम बात करते हैं तो here we are talking about real GDP, and अगर यहाँ पे होता current prices तो that would be for nominal GDP. So you need to keep this thing also in mind. So you can see कि as per the revisions जो final third revised estimate से GDP it has increased, and you can see कि कितना difference है between the first estimate and the third revised estimate. So that's there, and यहाँ पे आप negative में इसलिए देख रहे हो because this is during the COVID-19 time period, and नेगेटिव जीडीपी का भी आपको ये पता होना चाहिए कि जीडीपी नेगेटिव में मतलब कि एक ही आइडिया होता है ना कि अगर जीडीपी इट इज बीइंग रिकॉर्डेड इन नेगेटिव तो उसका मतलब ये हुआ कि जो फैक्ट्रीज थी वो कम्प्लीटली बंद हो गई या फिर मतलब क्या डिस्ट्रक्शन होगा कि वो चीज नेगेटिव में चली गई। तो मतलब इसका सिंपल मीनिंग यही होता है कि सिंस वी आर कैलकुलेटिंग जीडीपी फ्रॉम प्रीवियस ईयर, सो उस कंपैरिजन में इस साल जीडीपी इट इज इन नेगेटिव। इट इज नॉट कि चीजें बंद हो गई या फिर मतलब उस तरीके से इट इज नॉट द इम्प्लीकेशन। So it is just because we are comparing and we are calculating from the previous year. So that's why figures, it is a possibility that the figures, they might be recorded in negative. So that's what happened even during the COVID-19 times. And then again, we recovered back. So we came back in the positive territory, and that's the figure. So this second chart or table, it is talking about the GDP revision trend. It tends to happen in both the directions. So ये चीज माइंड में होना भी important है कि जब हम GDP जो डेटा है उसके रिवीजन की बात करते हैं तो both the directions में it is possible. It is not just कि it would be increasing further as we go with more estimates. So it can go even in negative also. So एक वो clarity होना भी important because अगर exam में कुछ ऐसा question आता है तो it is possible कि we might get confused there. So it is possible in both the direction, both the ways. So now coming to Financial Express. So we are having the production linked incentive scheme जो कि introduce की गई है so that we are able to boost the domestic manufacturing in terms of financial incentives which are provided on incremental output beyond a limit. So इसमें कुछ changes किए जा रहे हैं for the IT hardware and it's being made much more attractive. So in the updated version, the scheme duration, it is being increased to 8 years, and investment to be made flexible with the option to cover up the shortfall in subsequent years. And flexibility in investment, it was among the key demands which were made by the applicants. So that is being emphasized and focused upon, and additional incentives with the increased duration to 6 years. So firms, they're going to be allowed to even include investments made by their suppliers. So it is the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology when we are talking about the IT hardware sector, and it has prepared a fresh draft of the production linked incentive scheme to attract the global majors like Dell and HP. So currently the scheme, it is for 4-year tenure, and if companies, they fail to meet the laid down incremental production, as I talked and mentioned, incremental production pay, you are getting the financial incentives, and the sales target in a given year, they are not paid any incentive for that year. So if you fail to meet those incremental production के targets and sales targets, तब आपको कोई भी financial incentive नहीं provide किया जाएगा under this scheme. So right now it is for 4 years and बात की जा रही है changes किए जा रहे हैं to extend it up till 8 years. So in India, we have a large number of hydro PSUs, but we are thinking whether these hydro companies, they can come together as a hydro large PSU and then it becomes a specialized hydro company. So this is one thing. So the key budget numbers for 2022-23, they are in line with the revised estimates. So center's capital expenditure की अगर हम बात करें तो you can see that it is just increasing, and as per for the current financial year, it is estimated to be around 7%. So that is a likely number, likely possibility, and this is in terms of 7 rupees trillion. So the fiscal deficit in absolute amount, it was enhanced by 5.7%, even though as a percentage of GDP, it remained unchanged at the budget estimates level of 6.4%. So as a percentage of GDP, it is unchanged at 6.4% level. And the fiscal deficit as a percentage of GDP would be known when the provisional GDP numbers, they would be out by the end of May, but it will unlikely vary much from the revised estimates. That is one possibility and our expectations regarding this thing. And the government's non-tax revenues, they have exceeded the financial year 23's revised estimates because of the 16,000 rupees crores of extra dividend that has been received from the CPSEs and other government investments. So उसकी वजह से we are seeing कि जो government का non-tax revenue है, that is exceeded the revised estimates. So we have already talked about the passage of the competition bill, and here also we have seen, we have talked about the manufacturing PMI, which hits a 3-month high in March, but is not losing steam. That's a good and positive sign, we can say. So it signals the resilience in the demand along with the robust GST receipts. So we are performing nicely. We are resilient enough as an economy as a whole, given the global economic challenges and the financial challenges in terms of the bank's failure that we recently saw in US and Europe. So given all those things, India is on track. And in current financial year, the capital expenditure loans to the states was 7% higher than the revised estimates. So we need to know that this number is also increasing. So pulses, it might be possible that they may push the retail food inflation up, and some of the pulses that would be responsible for this would be tur dal prices. They're 27% above the MSP levels. Chana prices, they're also rising too. So retail inflation, as we talked about, we had talked a lot about the cereal inflation in terms of the wheat prices, how they're shooting up, and obviously now because of the unseasonal rainfall also, it might be possible that in coming times also we might see again a spike in food inflation, in cereal inflation. And here we are again seeing now concerns at the pulses front. So there are signs of inflation spiral when we talk about the pulses prices. So that's there. So this pair of I guess it would be tur and chana dal, they comprise around 62% of domestic pulse output, and as a CPI weightage is 2.38%. So when we talk about the Monetary Policy Committee up, that's like very recently we're going to have one, and more expectations are that we are going to see it again, one more hike in the repo rate. So we are seeing that this article is speaking that it will be difficult for the RBI to justify a pause in the rate hikes based on the incoming activity data, which is expect a 25 basis points of hike with a change in the stance. So this is the likely expectations. And a change in the stance to the neutral from the withdrawal of the accommodation is warranted, as almost the entire COVID time monetary stimulus that has been withdrawn now. But let's see, uske baad ही will be going into the details and kya different reasons diye jayenge by the MPC members. So after that only it would be like rational to discuss all of those reasons and जो भी point of view दिए जाएंगे. So because of untimely rains, we are seeing Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana, it must be made to work better, as there is bound to be considerable agrarian distress this time because of definitely untimely rains. So if it was heat stress in 2021-22 crop year that impacted the wheat crop and the procurement, untimely rains and the hailstorms this year, they have damaged the standing wheat crop due to the lodging and the bending over from the high velocity winds and the waterlogging, resulting in the delayed harvesting. So पिछले साल हमने देखा it was because of the heat waves. We saw the crop damage when we're talking about the wheat crop, and this year we are seeing untimely and unseasonal rainfall and hailstorms that have led to the crop damage. So the wheat growing states of Punjab, Haryana, Western UP, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, they have received more than normal rainfall from March 1 to 2025 that dampens the prospects of the proper wheat crop. And we can see that damage, it has not yet been officially assessed as of now, but there's a potential output loss of around 10%, which is likely. And definitely it would be affecting the government's procurement operations as well. So wheat stocks with the Food Corporation of India right now, they stand at 8.4 million tons against a buffer for April 1 of 7.4 million tons. And the FCI and the state agencies, they need to procure at least 30 million tons in the current Rabi harvesting season, so that the adequate grain that is available for the implementation of the National Food Security Act, and there is creation of an adequate buffer also at the same time of 27 million tons of wheat by July 1. So दोनों चीजें meet करना, that we are able to sufficiently provide the food grains for the National Food Security Act kind of PDS that we are running, and secondly, it is important for us to also maintain adequate amount of buffer stock. So given that, it would be important for the government to meet its procurement targets also. So वहाँ पे it might be facing some challenges, and inflation front for the consumers, that is obviously going to be another challenge. So it is important that we have a well-functioning crop insurance scheme that makes timely disbursements to the affected farmers. And unfortunately, the flagship Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana, which is one of the initiatives by the government, it began in 2016. It is still a work in progress as of now, as several states, they have opted out of the scheme due to the financial constraints, because कुछ changes किए गए थे, and जो financial burden था, जो financial responsibility and obligations of the states, that was increased later on. So uske wajah se, this is one reason why different states, they have opted out of the scheme. So as a result, from 2018 to 2022, there has been a decline in the number of participating farmers, and also we are seeing ki scheme ki coverage bhi kam ho rahi hai. So these states, they must rejoin, because there's a kind of a situation of agrarian distress. जहाँ तक कि हम wheat farmers की बात करें, and the scheme, it must be made much more smart and transparent with the application of modern technologies when it comes to assessing the damages in the field. And these are some of the views by the agricultural economist Ashok Gulati. So an ambitious trade agenda for a global India. So India's desire to reconfigure the global balance of power it is predicated on its ability to become an indispensable element in the global economic order, and thus it is not surprising that the new foreign trade policy, it seems to shed the reticence of the past. So for India, a strict focus on the domestic consolidation, it is key to its global rise and ensuring that it emerges as a critical vector in the global trade. So it is against the backdrop that the Modi government, it has unveiled the new foreign trade policy, which aims to increase the country's exports to $2 trillion by 2030. And unlike past such policies, it has no specific end date. So we have already seen this thing. It is not there. It is not for a particular time period that is not being fixed. And जो भी changes with time जरूरत पड़ेगी वो किए जाएंगे. And it replaces the previous FTP, which ended in 2020, but because of COVID-19, this policy was extended further. And as the world economy, it struggles with the recessionary trends हमें देखने को मिल रहे हैं in few countries. India, with its new foreign trade policy, it is signaling a new commitment and ambition to emerge as a critical node in the global economic order. So geopolitically अगर हम बात करें तो different world powers है, they are divided and there are fault lines between them which are also widening by the day. And there's also great power polarization. That is also the new reality that all the states in the international system today they have respond to, and China's aggression that is also growing, and that is around its periphery, and the Russian invasion of Ukraine that has shrunk the space for the developing world to pursue their development agenda. So ये different geopolitically challenges अगर हम बात करें तो ये कुछ challenges हैं जो अभी हमें current times में देखने को मिल रहे हैं, and these are all the keywords that we need to remember and have in mind. So Trade and Technology Corporation, to build the political trust is giving way to trust-based trade and technology partnerships. So those very nations that led the debate on the economic globalization, they are also turning away from its unprecedented ways. So specifically USA की बात करें in this context, they are again moving back to trade protectionism, जो कि पहले बात करते था of economic globalization. So even as challenges they mount for the global order on several fronts, मतलब globally obviously there are different challenges at the different fronts, and it is being viewed कि India's movement and Indian policymakers they are trying to ensure कि India it does not miss the bus this time in carving a unique place for itself in the global political and the economic order. So जो हमारे domestic consolidation है उस पे focus करना it would be very important for us, and ensuring that India emerges as a critical vector in the global trade matrix therefore should be a priority, and that is reflected in the new trade policy as well, because it is talking about and it seeks to further the digitization and streamlining of the procedures for the exporters, boost e-commerce exports, and make adequate provisions even for the MSMEs, and enhance India's ability to undertake the rupee trade with other nations. So ये कुछ focus areas है which the revised foreign trade policy is talking about. And definitely previous policy maybe we have made certain achievements which we've already discussed, and these are mentioned in this particular area. So India's desire to reconfigure the global balance of power that is predicated on its ability to become an indispensable element in the global economic order, and it is not going to be surprising therefore that it is shedding the reticence of the past in its economic engagements with the world, and that's the message that comes out of the new foreign trade policy, and hopefully it will provide enough ballast to the India's trading community to achieve the ambitious targets before time. So that's there. Finally, now coming to the Indian Express, let's see what else is remaining for us to be discussed. So China's global ambition is driven by its internal dynamics, as per our army vice chief. And being a totalitarian regime, China it has created and institutionalized a civil military system which leverages technology, knowledge, infrastructure for security purposes. So he added that the country is gaining an edge in the national security while posing a potential threat to its opponents with its advanced technological capabilities. So India's role in shaping the emerging world order, there was a lecture on this, and that's where he mentioned about some of his observations. So China's ambitions for regional and global dominance, they are driven by its internal dynamics and newfound status as a political, economic, technological, and military powerhouse. So separately, without naming China, he also said that India's transparent engagements and genuine outreach efforts, they have fared better despite the challenges which are posed by others' predatory economic pursuits. So all of his political hair. So let's move forward quickly. So coming to the editorial page, reform the defamation law. Already discussed about this. It's a repeat. And then further, a weaker push that is slower pace of the state capital expenditure raises questions over the extent to which public sector it can drive the economic momentum. So slower pace of the state's capital expenditure is a concern that is being discussed over here. So data on the government finances, which was released by the Comptroller General of the Accounts last week, it shows that the center's fiscal deficit for the previous financial year, it is unlikely to significantly exceed the revised estimates present in the recent union budget. So that's one thing. And on the revenue side, just center cut total tax collection that has grown at a healthy pace during April to Feb, despite subdued growth in the February. So gross tax collections, they have touched on rupees 25 lakh crore rupees, which is up by 12% over the same period in last year. So direct tax collections, they have grown at a considerably faster pace than the indirect taxes. Very important for us to remember this thing. And the data which was released on Monday shows that the provisional direct tax collections, uh, it have in fact exceeded the revised estimates. And under the direct taxes, we saw key corporate tax ka highest share, followed by income tax and the securities transaction tax. So this we've already seen. And on the expenditure side, while spending it slowed down in February, overall the central government ki spending thi for the year, previous financial year, that has grown by around 11%, and that is marginally higher than what was factored in the revised estimate. So capital spending, it has grown at a significantly higher pace of 21% so far, as the government it has focused on ramping up the investments. So ये बहुत important चीज है जो कि पहले भी हम बहुत बात करते थे कि गवर्नमेंट का ज्यादा फोकस या फिर ज्यादा एक्सपेंडिचर साइड होनी चाहिए ऑन द कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर इंस्टेड ऑफ द रेवेन्यू एक्सपेंडिचर. So this we have seen materializing in the previous financial year, and it has increased by around 21%. So to achieve the target for the full year, however, spending it will have to grow by 28% in March. And in comparison जो capital expenditure था by the state governments, वो इतना ज़्यादा अच्छे से perform नहीं किया या वो इतना ज़्यादा share नहीं था. So central government level पे that was good, but state level पे it is not increased by a higher amount. So that's one thing. And this implies that in order to meet the target states, they would have to raise their spending by around 76% in Feb and March. And failure to meet this year's targets, it will raise questions over their ability to achieve the scaled up targets for the upcoming financial year. So states, they account for a significant share of the overall public sector investment. So their spending, it is critical for driving the investment activity. So हमने ये एक साइड ये देखी कि अगर सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट यूनियन गवर्नमेंट का शेयर हाई है या फिर जो इंक्रीज देखी गई वो हाई है, तो वी कैन नॉट जस्ट सेलिब्रेट दैट एज एन अचीवमेंट, क्योंकि जब हम देखें कि स्टेट गवर्नमेंट्स का भी ओवरऑल शेयर इन द पब्लिक सेक्टर इन्वेस्टमेंट्स दैट इज आल्सो कंपैरेटिवली वेरी हाई. सो अगर स्टेट लेवल पे वी आर नॉट सीइंग सो मच ऑफ कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर, सो दैट इज अ कंसर्न, क्योंकि अगर हम इन्वेस्टमेंट एक्टिविटी को अगेन रिवाइविंग की बात करते हैं, ड्राइविंग अप की बात करते हैं, तो जो स्टेट गवर्नमेंट्स का शेयर इन द कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर है दैट आल्सो प्लेज अ वेरी वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट रोल. एंड ये कहीं ना कहीं जो इन्वेस्टमेंट एक्टिविटी है उसको डेफिनेटली इम्पैक्ट कर सकता है इन आने वाले टाइम में. सो द स्लोअर पेस ऑफ द स्टेट्स कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर raises questions over the extent to which the public sector it can drive the economic momentum. So driving up the economic momentum given the challenges that we are facing, so it is important कि जो states का role and responsibility and obligations है towards capital expenditure that is met on timely basis. Coming to the explained page, and already we have seen sales tax and actors copyright. So let's see which law is being talked about here. So it is basically the Maharashtra's Value Added Tax Act of 2002. So I don't think that this is much important for us. Let's move forward. So this article is talking in details about wet March and wheat crop. कल के newspaper में हमने ये देखा कि why basically these unseasonal rains, what is the reason behind them, that we saw in detail. So if you haven't gone through yesterday's analysis video, please go through that, because that was a very important article for us to understand about this thing. And This article is obviously talking about how unseasonal rains, they have hampered and impacted the wheat crop. So the rabi wheat crop last year, it was damaged because of unusual heat. Pichle saal, it was the unusual heat which impacted the wheat crop, and this year it is the unseasonal rain, and that's the main reason, unseasonal rain and the hailstorms that we are seeing. So but the impact on the wheat may not be as bad as last year. So this is we can say obviously a good thing कि पिछले साल के कंपैरिजन में इस साल इतना ज्यादा लॉस हम हमें नहीं देखने को मिलेगा. So it is just, in detail, it is talking about wheat. So that is not so important, but generally हमें पता होना चाहिए. So we have already discussed all those important things related to it. And we have discussed about the net direct tax collections. They have grown. And share की हमने बात कर ली है. Corporate tax का highest है, followed by income tax, then securities transaction tax. Manufacturing PMI already discussed, and OPEC plus direct impact भी हम देख चुके हैं. So all of that is repeat. So thank you so much for joining you. Thank you so much for joining in Sarkari, and I hope that you all must be like also going through the PDF link that I share every day, and the same has been shared in the description box for today's analysis video. So that plays an important role when it comes to revision. And that's all. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please hit the subscription button and the like button for this video.